Hello, hope you're doing well. Yeah, I'm doing pretty good here on a sunny October 22nd, I think it is. Double check my dates. Yeah, it's October 22nd. So we're getting pretty lucky with the weather here, although it feels like it's going to snow any day. So thank you for tuning in to some of my other videos. What I really wanted to do today was to follow up on that earlier video I did regarding privilege. I'm just going to focus on privilege today, but before the video was on privilege and inclusion and diversity and marginalization. It seems like this topic of privilege is just really picking up a head of steam. Everywhere you turn on the news, especially down south in the United States, there are panel discussions and commentation going on this idea of privilege. And not only is it linked to, I guess you could say, what it started out to at the very beginning was the idea of white privilege, so having to do with discrimination, things of this nature. But the idea of privilege has expanded to areas that we would have never considered before. As I mentioned, I think earlier in the other video, where somebody was concerned about the physical attributes of their body as being privileged, and consequently, because of that privilege, that they should be more self-conscious and making sure that they don't marginalize other people and all sorts of things. So this whole conversation is really exploding, and having some serious, I want to say serious, impacts on communities and the nation. Many people think that it's causing a significant divide and conflict. If you watch these news shows and other things that are going on, things going on in college campuses, you see that emotions run very high, to the point even of physical assault, etc. So these topics are definitely worth your consideration. And I know, it can feel really overwhelming. I mean, when you start to unpackage these concepts, oh my gosh, it just gets so confusing sometimes. And, words are so important, and it's just like splitting hairs around certain words. And so the conversations can not only become emotional, but extremely confusing at times. And as I said in the earlier video, I think a lot of that has to do with, I guess you could say, kind of the mishmash of different definitions and perspectives. But anyway, I wanted to do a follow-up on this idea of privilege. It's interesting. Just a couple of days ago, on October 18th, I was watching a Dr. Phil episode that was completely dedicated to him trying to help his audience better understand the idea of privilege, and he had a panel up there who were speaking to that as well, their own experiences. But it sure didn't take long, I mean literally minutes, within the show, that people started to get emotional, and you could tell that there was people who were confused about it. In the show they did try to go to some length to try to give people a sense of what this kind of unconscious privilege in this particular show was, trying to explain white privilege. But again, what showed up very quickly was that it was, even the people on the panel were getting emotional. Certainly some of the people in the audience, and I think Dr. Phil had his hands full trying to guide that towards what I think he wanted to have happen with it. And I think that in and of itself confounds the issue, makes it even tougher to address when you have people who are putting themselves forward as experts, and then they too are getting emotional, or they too become sarcastic, or just add fuel to the fire. And so yeah, it's a tough discussion all the way around, and especially if you start to dive into it, because on the surface it kind of can look like an easy read, an easy understanding, but you start to go into place, and it quickly becomes very murky, a bit like quicksand. You can find yourself getting pulled right down into it if one isn't careful. But I wanted to talk about two pieces today, specifically what I think are kind of the elephants in the living room that nobody seems to want to talk about. And the first one is the inflated sense of entitlement and indulgence that we live in these days. And this has been my area of expertise for almost 2 decades now. So, so it's easy for me to speak on it, and I want to draw this conversation of privilege to that. And then the second elephant in the living room is the transpersonal piece. It's the spiritual piece that nobody's talking about. And I want to talk about how important that piece is. And why is that? Well, because, if you think about the sense of entitlement and indulgence that exists these days, and it's always this way, and I want you to think about the previous videos that I've done, wherein I described 3 major components of that sense of entitlement, or what we might call immaturity, or what we might also call infantility. So being infantile. So what we might call being immature, infantile, or self-infatuation and a magnified sense of entitlement. That can fit all those different labels. Immature, like I said, infant-like. And those 3 major components are egocentricity, narcissism, and grandiosity. So what do those 3 components mean? The egocentricity means that the world should revolve around me. Why? Because I'm narcissistic, because I'm pretty darn special. And why again? Because I'm grandiose. It means that I'm godlike. So if somebody is running those 3 characteristics, they have placed themselves well beyond anybody else in terms of their specialness, in terms of their uniqueness, in terms of their nobility, in terms of their their value. Everything they say, is should be accepted without question. People should be serving them, etc. So what I want to suggest here, I guess you could invite you into this, to use your imagination here for a second. What do you think would happen if we put 2 or more people in a room who all were running those character traits? The narcissism, the egocentricity, the grandiosity. Well, by the very nature of those 3 things together, any one of them in fact, but together, it means that the person themselves is kind of the center of the universe, right? Everything revolves around them. Everything has to serve them. Their opinion, again, is not just opinion, it's fact and beyond question. So if you get 2 or more people like that in the same room, there would be a massive competition. It would be survival of the fittest. It would be dog eat dog, because there can only be one. There can only be one special one. And this scramble for specialness can show up in 2 different ways. One, it can show up as a victim story, or it can just show up as, who's the better, who's the most outstanding. And in society today, we've got both of those streams running real hard, especially on the victim side, where we've got people who are competing. There's people in different groups, what we call special interest groups possibly, but different groups who are all trying to vie for everybody's attention to be the most hurt, to be the most special, to have their words accepted beyond debate, beyond question. But what happens then, of course, is it's very divisive. By the very nature of it, it becomes divisive. One group against the other group. You could say it could be a competition over, if you will, privilege. Anytime there's division, there's difference, right? There's going to be inequity. And so whatever group is getting society's attention at a particular time, that by its very nature is going to divide it from another group, and the group that's been excluded, if you will, is going to feel marginalized. And so what we've got is just thousands of different groups out there and individuals all wanting to be heard, all wanting to be special for whatever it takes. I mean, you look at what's going on in the world of social media and technology right now, where social media is trying to give a platform for everybody to be special. Everybody to have their 15 minutes of fame. How about 15 hours? How about 15, whatever it is, it's like that. It's all these people out here, in this generation that are impacted by this contagious, if you will, disease of entitlement and indulgence. Everybody needs some platform, some place to feel special. So I want you to think about that, as the first elephant in the living room. And I want you to see the impossibility of it. Like I said, 2 or more people in the room, it's just going to get crazy. It's going to get chaotic. People are never going to get enough. I mean, that is another trait of being immature. Is the immature person doesn't know when enough is enough. An immature person is insatiable. They just take and take and take and take, and it's never enough. Now, one of the things I want to say connected to this, and I hope I don't confuse you more, but what I'm about to say, if you've been following the videos or acquainted with my work, it'll make sense. When we talk about that inflated sense of entitlement and indulgence, and I say inflated, the entitlement and indulgence, the tendencies for those things are embedded in us, because what is embedded in the very core of our nature is the narcissism, the egocentricity, and grandiosity. There's no way of escaping that. It's just embedded in who we are. Now, before, when I've talked about trauma and how when a person has an inflated sense or a sense of entitlement, and a person doesn't get what they feel they're entitled to, which registers in the psyche as feeling robbed or violated, so therefore it meets the criteria of being traumatic. And when one feels traumatized, there's 2 pieces that immediately come out of that. Usually the first piece to emerge when we're traumatized is that we feel hurt, we feel victimized. The second piece that shows up is revenge. Remember, there's victim and oppressor. There's victim and revenge motives going on. So, you see, on the surface, it may look like these special interest groups, because they're all running the trauma story, right? And these special interest groups may say to themselves that what they want is equality, but what you're going to see happening, and what is happening, if you watch many of these panel discussions or these shows on this idea of diversity and inclusion and marginalization and privilege, is that the people say that they've been hurt by it, they've been marginalized. But then you'll also see where these people have received supports, etc. And as those supports come to them, it takes away from the other people. So those other people become marginalized. I saw this on the Dr. Phil show on the 18th, where there were some audience members who were saying, but now I feel marginalized. So now you've got 2 parties who feel marginalized. Now the first party says to the second party, well, how do you like it? How's that feel? How does it feel? And then there was some snickering that went along with it. That's common, isn't it, in immature people? If somebody experiences a hurt, if an immature person experiences a hurt, and then the person who hurt them gets hurt, the person who hurt them, um, also feels hurt, or maybe even more hurt. The person who was initially hurt will say that, won't they? Will say, well, how does it feel? How does it feel to be where I was at? You see, that's what we call eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Live by the sword, die by the sword. That's a very immature and risky way to live. And I might say to the first person who was hurt, okay, well, that person over there who hurt you is also hurt. Now you both feel marginalized. Isn't it time? Isn't enough enough? That person will say, no way. I want them to hurt more. I want them to feel what I felt plus more. You see, that is the entitlement and indulgent dynamic at play when it comes to trauma. So what I'm suggesting here is all these special interest groups who are coming from a very wounded, immature place are also going to run a revenge motive. See, equality, if you want to call it that, or fairness, isn't the goal. The goal is revenge. The goal is to deal out some pain, to make whoever they think was the oppressor, to make them hurt as much. See, if it weren't about that, then somebody would say, okay, well, first of all, my being marginalized may be that, but my goal is certainly not to take away from you in order for me to feel better. Like, how do I do that? Like, it's kind of like stealing from the rich, to give to the poor. Is that what this is? Or, what do they call it? Taking from Peter to give to Paul, whatever. I mean, that's just tipping the scale in the other direction. There's no fairness, there's no equity, there's no compassion, there's no love in that. Now, if you take the discussion, and this is, I'd like to invite you to look at some of the YouTube videos on privilege and other topics by Jordan Peterson. He's a professor out of the University of Toronto, is really adding a lot to this discussion. If you go to my channel there, and have a look, you'll see in my library there's a section on privilege, and I've put some of his videos in there, as well as Ben Shapiro. See, these are some of the voices out there that aren't being heard. You see, that's also what happens when people run inflated entitlement and indulgence, is that they scream and yell to the point where they blur out all the other voices and perspectives. Why? Well, because like I said, when somebody is narcissistic and grandiose, nobody else has anything to offer to the conversation. Everybody else's comments need to be squelched. And so that's what's going on right now too. So the other elephant in the living room. This is the nice elephant, if you will. This is related to, to my other video on humility being the great equalizer. Now, I had also mentioned in my previous video on privilege, I also, offered my thought was that I don't think people are ultimately have anything, have anything against privilege. I think it can stir things up because we still have the definition wrong on it. Like it kind of depends on where you're standing when you look at it, because where you're standing gives you a view, a perspective. But the spiritual or transpersonal perspective on privilege is a beautiful one. And I mentioned this before, that I'm a big Einstein fan, and there was a quote that I had seen Einstein associated with Einstein a bit ago, and it was this. It was, as we all, or as we stand before God, we are all equally foolish. As we stand before God, we are all equally foolish. And if you know a bit about Einstein, even through some of the quotes and things, which are many that he's known for, he wasn't a religious man, but he was somebody who was deeply aware of something bigger. And so, interesting quote I thought by him that was very fitting for this idea, because really in all kind of spiritual disciplines, and what I call decent spiritual disciplines, because for me any healthy spiritual discipline has to contain a discipline of humility. A discipline of humility. So one of the things that we could say if we had a transpersonal approach on the idea of privilege, regardless, privilege, period, right? Whether it's genetic privilege, where it's inherited privilege, white privilege, subconscious privilege, whatever, all these privileges that people seem to have. See, when we have privileges, if you want to call them that, I just want to use that word right now because it's what we're talking about. So when we have privileges, and those privileges are in the hands of the immature, what do you think the immature person would do with all those privileges? They would serve themselves. Why wouldn't they? They're really special. The world should revolve around them, and they're God. So any privilege that they have would serve themselves. You see, that's the opposite of any decent spiritual discipline, of any healthy spiritual discipline. Because in spiritual discipline, what it says is that you do have unique talents, abilities that were all made in a very unique way. And that's mind-blowing, isn't it? We're all like these, unique, if you will, snowflakes. None of us is made the same. We all have different potentials, different talents, different abilities, down to the most minute. So there's no way, you see what I'm saying? If we're all born unique, and we all have our unique abilities and talents, by the very nature of who we are as human beings, we cannot be the same. That's why this discussion really needs to be about fairness and not equity. Any parent knows this idea. You could have 1, 2, 3 kids. You don't treat them all the same. You treat them fairly. You treat them uniquely because they're all unique. And you approach each one according to their own abilities, temperaments, skills, what have you. It's just that way. We're all unique. And by that very fact, we all have different skills and abilities. And I'll have an ability that you won't have, and you'll have an ability that I won't have. And when you exercise that ability, it may give you opportunity within a particular societal context. Does that make you privileged? Does that make me privileged? So that's where the word, I don't even know if it's the right word we should be using. Privileged. You see, one person over here, we can talk about earned privilege. One person over here might say, well, yeah, I've got this opportunity because I worked hard and I earned it. But in a spiritual discipline, the question keeps coming at you. But where did you get that ability? So you say you worked for your opportunity, but where did you get the ability to work for your opportunity? See, ultimately, in a spiritual discipline, a healthy spiritual discipline, every one of us, if you want, again, to stay within the topic, is privileged. But we all have different privileges. Now, if in our discipline we are here to serve others, to use our abilities and skills to serve others and not ourselves, then doesn't that even the playing field? I mean, we know that to be true. And for the longest time, we've lived with that moral value. You know, that if you've been given the privilege of intellect, if you've been given the privilege of education, if you've been given the talent of, of being a mathematician or a poet or whatever it is, that we use those talents and abilities to help each other, to give, to serve. Why? Because everything is a privilege. Everything, if you will, is a God-given privilege. If you drill down deep enough in any of our abilities, you will have to ask yourself, where did you get the ability? Well, I don't know. Was it genetic? Well, who put those genes together that way? Well, the answer in a transpersonal spiritual discipline has to be a creator. And just like a parent, if you have 3 children with 3 different temperaments and different skills and abilities, do you love one more than the other? Absolutely not. You love each the same. So they're all unique, but they're all loved, and all the talents that they have and the capacities and abilities that they display were not something that they earned. It was bestowed. If we want to say that that's the definition of privilege, that privilege is an opportunity or an advantage or a benefit that someone receives without earning it. Right? I mean, that is the great equalizer. But if we cut ourselves off as individuals and as groups and as a society and as a nation from a transpersonal or spiritual vision, that spiritual reality, then by default it leaves us in immaturity and in division and competition. Like Einstein said, we must stand before something greater than ourselves. Why? Because the nature of who we are is narcissistic, egocentric, and grandiose. If we understand the nature of who we are, if you will, and left to our own devices, we will go that direction, then we can only be headed for trouble. We can only be headed back towards places we've already been, very dark places. So yes, I want you to notice all these conversations that are going on around the topic of privilege, inclusion, marginalization, all this kind of stuff. The farther we get as a society away from what we might call the grand myth or the logos, the farther we get away from that transpersonal spiritual connection with a creator, something bigger than ourselves, the more by default we go into narcissism, egocentricity, and grandiosity. Can you see just how simple this is? It really is quite simple. That if you can see things clearly about the nature of who we are and where things are going to go, then it only makes sense that a good policy, if you will, a good idea is to stand before something greater, something that equals the playing field. And here's the thing, I mean, it can't be a societal construct, because then every society is going to have its different thing. Everything is going to be subjective. And the narcissist and the grandiose person loves subjectivity, right? Because that's kind of their ace up the sleeve, right? If you try to say, well, there's an objective reality, well, no, not really. Reality is what I say it is. Whoa, that's pretty grandiose, isn't it? The truth is what I think it is. It's based upon what I think it is. It's beyond, it's fact. It's beyond dispute. If you don't like it, you can leave. I hear people say that all the time and they think it's mature. If you don't like who I am, screw you, right? Well, that can sound cavalier, but it's out of touch with reality. So I want to end this here, folks. I think at the end of the day, this is really terrain that we've already covered through our history, if you will. But it can get lost in these, I don't know what you want to call them, these conversations that are so confusing and so academically, aloof and elevated. But have a look and see what's going on there. See if what I'm telling you isn't true. See, because there's no way that we can understand everybody. Let me say this. Having said that, there's no way that we can understand everybody, is there? You could spend a lifetime just trying to get to know your best friend. People in, if you will, in relationships and marriages, we spend a lifetime getting to know our partners. Try getting to know, because we're all unique, right? Try getting to know everybody. If everybody's out there screaming that they need to be known and need to be seen as special, see, it'll never happen. It can't happen. It's an impossible recipe. But let me tell you something else that spirituality offers. Like if we were to look at, say, okay, well, who are some of our great spiritual teachers? What you'd find oftentimes is that those spiritual teachers didn't spend time trying to get to know people personally. They didn't, some people think, oh, well, if you're really going to get to know people and really have compassion and all this for people and their experiences, you have to travel. Well, there's a heck of a lot of people on the globe to meet, heck of a lot of cultures, countries, what have you. You'd probably never get that done in a lifetime. So that's kind of a good idea in theory, but actually it doesn't work at all. And beyond that, it's not what spiritual disciplines talk about. It's not the answer. Well, what is the answer? Well, according to most spiritual disciplines, if you really want to have compassion for people, you meditate. You go deep inside oneself, and what you find is that on the surface, we're all unique, absolutely, in our life circumstances and our hurts and our joys and all these things are unique, and that's what makes it all wonderful. But it's kind of like I think about a tree, and on a tree, there are leaves, and when it's in full bloom and it looks wonderful. And it's alive, and when the wind might blow a little bit, all those leaves kind of twist and turn and shake in their own unique way. But every one of those leaves is connected to a branch, and every branch is connected to a limb, and every limb is connected to the trunk. And so it's like that, I think, in humanity and in the human minds that we all share. Is that on the outside, we're all wonderful and beautiful and have our unique stories to tell. We're all unique. But if we go deeper and deeper and deeper, layer by layer, into the human mind, into the human heart, we find that we are so alike. I don't have to travel halfway across the globe to understand somebody's desire for connection, somebody's desire, you know, for, you know, for purpose and meaning. I don't have to do that. If I apply myself within a spiritual discipline, I can find those answers right where I am. And that's what our great teachers did. And they said that if they could do it, we could do it. The question for us right now is, why are we ignoring those paths? And why are we taking this exhausting, treacherous path that we're taking? This path that just leads to nothing but exhaustion and futility and despair. I mean, why do we think, you know, that you know, anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation are on the sharp rise right now? I mean, if you give an assignment like that, you know, according to, you know, what's going on for us right now in politics or in society, you know, we're to be sensitive to everybody in all cultures and all special interest groups, and your task is to go out and make sure that you attend all these workshops and spend time and all getting acquainted and super familiar, in fact, with everything that's going on. You know how daunting of a task that would be? That would be an impossible task to complete. No wonder somebody would be a nervous wreck, full of depression and despair. Could never make it. See, that's the immature mind at work. The mature mind knows a better way, a faster way, if you will, a more real way. And it's been before us since the beginning. Again, the real question is, why as a society are we, you know, purposely turning away from it? This is the hugest elephant in the living room that's not being talked about. So anyway, folks, give it some thought. Like I said, I'm a dad too, right? I mean, I've got a son who, you know, we have to sit down and talk about this stuff. I have to figure out a way to find peace and tranquility, you know, on this planet and in our lives. And I'm sure you want the same thing. And you want to be able to help your children as well, your family members. Find peace in all this craziness, in this storm, in this tidal wave of inflated entitlement and indulgence. So, thank you for tuning in and bearing with me as I go through this journey as well, as a human being, and again as a father, and it just seems to be part and parcel of where we're living right now. So let's dig in and let's help each other. Have a good day, and I'll look forward to seeing you at some of the upcoming presentations and workshops, and thank you for taking your time to tune in. Have a good day.